Welcome to this Wiggin and Dana Private Client Services Department videocast on 2020 estate planning opportunities. I'm Michael Clear, partner at Wiggin and Dana. I'm going to be joined today by two of my colleagues, Carolyn Reers and Dan Daniels.
Hey, Mike.
Hi, Mike.
Thanks for joining me today.
Good to be here.
Glad to do it.
We're going to talk about a couple factors in the current environment, which is going to then lead us to some of our clients' planning strategies. So one of the first for you, Carolyn, is talk to us about the current federal estate tax environment.
We have a great opportunity this year because the exemption is higher than it's ever been. So on the federal level, clients are actually able to gift $11,580,000 without estate tax. And we've never seen it at this high a level before.
At that high level, what's the future of it look like?
So it's a window of opportunity. The higher level came into effect with the tax law changes at the end of 2017, and they will expire on January 1, 2026, when we'll go back to an exemption at the old levels, which will probably be something in the range of $5,600,000, so almost half.
So that environment, so our high exemptions, we know are going to be in effect until the end of 2025.
And that's a certainty. The uncertain part is whether we might have a change in administration in November's election. The Democratic candidates have all made statements to the effect that they would like to bring those exemptions down sooner, either to the 5.6 million or perhaps even to 3,500,000. So that window could be closing much sooner than we think.
Okay. With that high exemption, there's certainly going to be then some clients who don't think they need to worry about estate taxes or estate planning because their exemption, if they're single, is under that level, or if they're married, it's under $22 million. What do we tell those clients?
Again, that it's a limited opportunity to do something before the rates change. Again, we know for a fact that the rates are scheduled to go back down in 2026. And there's a good chance that they'll go down much sooner. And we have to keep in mind that we have a 40% federal estate tax, and in states that have state taxes, it's generally in the range of 10 to 12%. So you really are looking at a 50% tax on any amounts you're trying to leave to your heirs over the exemption amount. So even if it's a $5.6 million exemption, anything over that, you're losing 50% to taxes, whereas today you have the opportunity to double that amount.
Okay. Yeah, I would just add that there's some clients for whom this is a conundrum. So if you have clients who are wealthy by most standards, let's say they have $10 or $20 million so that they could afford to use the exemption, arguably, but let's say that those clients are in their 50s, they may need the money back. So it's a difficult choice for clients who are merely wealthy as opposed to super wealthy, and I think we have to keep that in mind.
Okay. So in addition to these, our high estate tax exemption, Dan, we're seeing plummeting interest rates. What does that do on the planning horizon?
Well, there's a number of planning strategies that are dependent on interest rates. The easy way to look at it is there's several strategies that involve exchanging a potential growth asset for a note or some other stream of payments. And the goal is for the performance of that asset that's exchanged to exceed the hurdle rate of interest. And the interest rates are published by the IRS every month. Those interest rates are as low as I've ever seen them in 30 years of doing this. They're well below 1%. So for many of these strategies to work, if the asset that's transferred performs at a rate of just over 1%, there's going to be value transferred to the family outside the transfer tax system.
Then you can couple that, I think, kind of with where asset valuations are today. Talk about how maybe the public and the private markets can help planning.
Yeah, for sure. In the silver lining department, the fact that the market is, at least you could say, volatile. It's taken dips and gains over the last several months. But if you can find assets that are valued lower than they ought to be and isolate that value in some kind of transfer, you can get the asset out of the estate. I sometimes refer to it as give low and die high. So if you can get an asset out of the estate at current values, you have confidence that the market really is, over the long term, going to perform pretty well. This is an opportunity to get assets out of the estate like no other in recent memory.
And I would just add to that, we saw the market dip and then come back. Given everything that's going on in the world today in the upcoming election, I think we're going to see a lot more peaks and troughs. So there is still opportunity to do this planning, even though we have seen the market come back a bit.
So, so we've identified three factors that are out there in the environment. They are high estate tax exemption, our low rates, and volatile asset valuations. And on the asset valuation side, I think you see that on the public market, but you also see it on the closely held business side or the privately held stock side, where appraisers, private equity buyers, investment bankers, we don't know the impact of the current environment is on those assets. So let's shift over and talk about some of the strategies that we're using to take advantage of those situations. So Carolyn, so how do we take advantage of these high estate and gift tax exemptions?
So we make gifts because obviously no one wants to die before 2026. So assuming we're all alive on 2026 when the exemption comes down, we want to have made sure that we've maximized use of those high exemptions we see today while they're available. So today, clients can give away roughly $11.5 million, and that's in a couple, husband and wife, so a total of almost $23 million, to their children or other descendants, or to trusts. And obviously, we typically use trusts for this kind of planning. The benefit is that once you make the gift, Congress has in fact told us that there is no recapture when the exemption amount goes back down as scheduled in 2026. So if you make it in during this window of opportunity and survive through 2026, you have managed to maximize the exemption amount that you can pass assets to your descendants, regardless of whether the exemption goes back down to 5.6 or even 3.5.
Yeah, and I'd emphasize something, Carolyn, you said a few minutes ago. That window may slam shut a lot sooner than 2026, given the election. It could slam shut in 2021 or 2022.
Right. And to Dan's point, we do have many clients who say, this does sound like a great opportunity, but it's also an awful lot of money. And the answer to that is, in the trust that we typically use to do gifting, we can create a lot of flexibility around getting assets out of the trust. And that includes that a spouse is oftentimes a beneficiary, which is a way to make a distribution back to the couple. So there are some interesting planning tools that we have in our trust war chest so that clients don't feel like they've made the gift, it's really gone forever.
Yeah, that's great, because that can often be a hurdle to a client making that gift. And I think in a future video cast, we might talk a little more in depth about kind of the trust design and distribution opportunities of what we can do there. So Dan, when we talk about gifting, we often will talk about one, what Carolyn had just mentioned, which is kind of capturing today's exemption level. But then we talk about freezing assets, freezing the value of assets, removing assets from your estate, and discounting. One of those strategies, or a popular strategy, is a grantor retained annuity trust. Can you tell us how one of those trusts works?
Yeah, I like the grantor retained annuity trust. It's commonly referred to as a GRAT, because it's a kind of no-risk way to give your children what you might call an option on the future growth in an asset. And it doesn't use any exemption. One drawback of making gifts using the exemption now is you've used up that particular piece of your exemption, and if the asset goes down in value, you've wasted that exemption. So a GRAT doesn't do that. It basically says you put assets into a trust, you retain the right to take back a stream of payments that has exactly the same value as the asset you stuck in the trust. And that exactly the same value is determined using discount rates, the current very low discount rates. And mathematically, if the assets inside that trust perform at a rate greater than the discount rate, which is less than 1%, then there's going to be value transferred at zero gift tax cost.
Kind of in that avoidance of the risk of the asset dropping is a big plus. And I think also because of the zero gift tax cost, if the client has already made gift or used all of their exemption, kind of talking about Carolyn's strategies, it's an opportunity for them to further move assets, appreciating assets to that next generation.
Sure.
Often, I think what we hear two-year GRATs. So a GRAT, this trust would last for 2 years. Are you seeing some people thinking of longer terms at this point because of the low rate?
Yeah. I mean, if you think of a 2-year GRAT, if somebody puts $1 million in it, they're going to retain the right to get back a little over $500,000 a year. And the gift is zero because they've retained a value exactly equal to what they put in. And those short-term GRATs are done for assets that we anticipate are going to blow up in value in a very short period of time. On the other hand, we have these low interest rates, and we want to lock those in. If you have an interest rate of less than 1%, that's your hurdle. You could put a basket of vanilla securities into a GRAT, lock in that interest rate for maybe 10 years. And the accumulated growth over that period of 10 years can pass to the children or a trust for them with zero gift tax. So that's a benefit of locking in the rate. The downside is a GRAT, which we can talk about in a longer future video cast. But one downside of a GRAT is you got to outlive that term. So that's a push me, pull you kind of issue that we come across with a GRAT. 10-year GRAT will be wonderful to lock in that interest rate, but you're probably not going to do that for a 97-year-old.
And then you mentioned it, but really, so for a short-term GRAT, assets that are good or something that you think is going to pop in value, are there assets that are bad for GRATs?
Yeah, that annuity payment, the A in GRAT, has to be paid every year on time. And it doesn't have to be paid in cash, but it's got to be paid. If you have an illiquid asset, like a closely held business asset, that maybe doesn't produce a lot of cash flow, it's got potential for future growth, but doesn't produce a lot of cash flow, how are you going to make that annuity payment? You're allowed to make it by giving back pieces of the business, but you're going to have to get those pieces appraised every year, and that can be a very expensive proposition. So the kind of assets we want to put into a GRAT are those that are pretty liquid, like a vanilla securities portfolio. You can just take back some shares of Amazon stock if you put that into a GRAT, whereas if you put ABC Incorporated family business in, you're not going to be able to do that easily.
Great. So, Carolyn, these low interest rates may create opportunities for people or clients to help specific individuals. Do you have clients that use that strategy?
Yeah, so I think you're referring to family loans, and we're seeing lots of loaning among family members and among family trusts. And again, this is driven by these historically low interest rates. So the rates to make loans to family members to help them start businesses or buy houses or do other things is again under 1%, which means that very little is owed back to the person making the loan, who's typically the parent or sometimes the grandparent. And these loans can also be made to family trusts in such a way that there are no income tax attributes to the lending.
So you're generally, you can pick the term, you can go with the lowest rate possible, but I imagine an important aspect of it is documenting these loans.
Exactly. So it's super important that there's a written agreement, and you have to charge some interest, and there can't be a predetermined plan to forgive the loan. So these do have to have some of the bona fides of a third-party loan like you would obtain from a financial institution. So the most important being a written agreement, charging some kind of interest, and usually making some kind of payment. Even if it's only making annual interest payments, it is recommended for the loan to be respected that some payment is made each year, even if the principal is on a balloon payment. And as you mentioned, these can be done using short-term rates, which are less than 3 years, mid-term rates, which are less than 9 years, or long-term rates. We are seeing clients tending to make long-term and mid-term rate loans, again, because even at longer terms, we have interest rates under 1%.
For clients who maybe did a loan to a family member a couple of years ago when we thought the rates were low and they were at 3%, or what are you suggesting those clients consider?
So in that case, we recommend that they think about refinancing the loan. So normally we'll have them come current on the existing loan, so pay interest to date and do a new loan, sometimes paying down some of the principal or perhaps putting up some collateral. But refinancing is also something that we're recommending that clients look at on existing loans. I had one client say to me, he made a loan a few years ago at 3%. He said, I called him about today's rate and, it's at 0.5%. He said, well, why didn't we use that rate 3 years ago? So again, it's because these are published by the IRS on a monthly basis, and we just happen to be in an incredibly low interest rate environment. So the opportunity is here.
It's remarkable, really, how low the rates are, because I think at the even over 9-year rate you're at or under, just under 1%. Sometimes clients, as you mentioned, might make that loan to a family member or to a trust. Do you want to talk about the sale to grantor trust strategy?
Yeah, so this is a good strategy that we often talk about with clients alongside grants. And again, it's a tool to move future appreciation on an asset outside of your taxable estate. So for example, if I have a family trust and I have an interest in a business that's worth, say, $10 million, and I've used my exemption already, or I have other plans for how I want to use that, I can sell the interest to my family trust and take back a note for $10 million plus 0.5% or 0.75% of interest. Now, the trust does owe me back the $10 million plus this small interest every year, but any appreciation in that asset is now outside of my taxable estate. And I haven't had to use any exemption to do that. And it can be very effective, for example, with a closely held business and something that you don't want to have to annually value, which, as Dan mentioned, is one of the considerations that can be difficult with a GRAT that has to pay an annuity each year. In the loan to trust, you value once on the way in.
I was just going to add, the closely held business interest, it kind of supercharges this whole transaction because it looks a lot like a loan to a trust. The transaction that Carolyn was discussing earlier, the trust is doing leveraged investing. What it's investing in with the sale to a grantor trust is a typically discounted asset. So if you have a business that's worth $10 million and you sell 50% of it to a trust, an appraiser is going to apply discounts to reflect lack of control and lack of marketability. So the asset's not worth $5 million, 50% times 10 million. It's going to be worth something less than that under the tax law. But in the eyes of the family, it's really worth 50% times 10 million equals a $5 million asset. So if you can get that asset out of the estate at a $4 million value, a discount to $4 million, you've made $1 million of value kind of disappear from the system. So that's a way of kind of supercharging the transaction that Carolyn's describing.
Exactly. And as I mentioned before, when we do these techniques, we typically structure this so that even though it's a sale, there's no capital gain recognition on the sale to the trust, and there's no income tax event on the annual payment of interest.
So to kind of highlight, so the sale transaction can be good for the hard to value assets, as opposed to those hard to value add a level of complexity to a grantor retained annuity trust.
Right, and as Dan mentioned, with the discounts, that puts a win on top of it.
That's great. Well, I think that's a really strong kind of conversation and overview of the kind of current opportunities that we're seeing, and then some of the strategies that we're helping our clients implement to take advantage of those. Could each of you give me a takeaway for our listeners that they should think about doing in the next few months?
I would say the takeaway is do something. I think our clients are telling us, and we as tax advisors are seeing, the risk of this window closing. I know we've mentioned it several times during our conversation today, but some clients are saying they want to act even before the election. That may not be quite necessary. I think we'll probably have some time after the election, and the Senate and the House and the presidency all have to turn Democratic in order for there to be any risk before 2026. But really act on this stuff now, or at least talk to one of us soon, so that we can figure out whether it's something you need to do.
Yeah, no, I'll just add to do something, start early, because these are pretty complicated concepts, and it takes some time to really understand them and sometimes to obtain valuations on assets. So sooner the better.
That's great. Thank you very much. And I hope you follow us, as we're going to do a few additional video casts on some of the strategies that we talked about today. We'll dive into them a little more in depth. So we'll do one on grantor retained annuity trusts. We'll do one on sales. We're going to talk about trust design and the use maybe of some special trusts to take advantage of the exemption. And we will conclude with a session on insurance and using insurance trusts. So Carolyn and Dan, thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Mike.